Masechet Menaḥot Daf Dalid. Previously, we discussed the two statements of Rabbi Shimon that contradict each other. We're talking about a case where a kohen does kemitzah shelo lishma. In the first statement, Rabbi Shimon said that it's valid and he fulfills the obligation of the owner. The second statement was more stringent and said, although the korban mincha is valid as the korban mincha, but it does not fulfill the obligation of the owner because it was shelo lishma. We saw three different ways of resolving the contradiction, and now we're going to analyze how come each sage disagrees with the opinion of the other. Kulahu kerabah la'amri, da'ad rabba, machshava demin kera, pasal rahamana. The other sages do not agree with Rabbah. Rabbah said that we can be lenient when he has in mind a different type of korban. You know why? Because it's obvious that his intention is wrong. You're bringing something in a pan, so you know that this is obviously not something that was in an oven. It's already prepared, and any time it's clearly recognizable that his intention is the opposite of the action, so we can ignore the intention. Whereas, if he has in mind a different person, it was really supposed to be for Reuven instead of Shimon, so then that's not clearly recognizable, and therefore that's the second case in which it does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. However, the other sages disagree with this logic because they would say the opposite is true. When the intention is clearly wrong, then it should be worse, not better. Rabbah was saying, the intention is clearly wrong, then the action speaks louder than the intention. We follow the action, not the intention, because the intention is clearly goes against the facts that we can all see. That's what Rabbah said. The other said that no, if the intention is so clearly against the facts, then that actually makes it worse, and that will make it disqualified. Kerava la amri vezot torat la mashma lehu. Rava said that we can be lenient when it's supposed to be one type of korban mincha, and instead he has in mind a different type of korban mincha, because the pasuk says vezot torat hamincha. This is the law. There's one law for all korban menaḥot. They all are within the same category. Therefore, you can be lenient. Unlike if he says if it's supposed to be a korban mincha, he has in mind this is l'shem a zevach, it's for an olah. Now, that depends on saying this methodology, that the word vizot torat always means that everything in that category is all the same. However, the other sages do not agree with that methodology, as we brought the example when it says zot torat hachatat. And although Rabbi Shimon says you can interchange one type of chatat with another, the other sages said, no, if it's supposed to be a chatat for cheleb, and then he has in mind it's a chatat for a nazir, it's no good. So the others don't agree with that methodology, that vizot torat means that everything within that is the same, and a wrong intention within those categories is the same. They say, no, not so. And they disagree with Rav Asher. Rav Asher is the one that said that he's lenient, Rabbi Shimon's lenient when he said, I'm taking this kemitzah for the sake of a pot. For the sake of a pot, that's just a vessel. It's like saying for the sake of a hammer. Then you can be lenient. But if he says for a minchat marcheshet, then it would be a problem, because that is a valid type of intention. It's just the wrong intention, and so it disqualifies it. However, Rav Acha, the son of Rava, asked about that. What if it's a dry meal, and he says l'shem belulah? And so we had to answer, no, l'shem belulah means in general mixing, not a type of korban. But that's the question was a difficult question. Even though we gave an answer, the answer was not the best answer, and we're still bothered. The other sages were bothered by Rav Acha's question, and that's why they did not agree with Rav Asher. Milta de peshita le Rabba lahagisa Rabba lahagisa miba le Rav Hoshaya. Now, this matter, which was clear to Rabbah on one side and Rava on the other side, Rabbah said if the intention is clearly, recognizably false, then we disregard the intention. And the Rava said, if it's clearly recognizably false, then it's a problem. So they had two different opinions, but they were clear about which way it is. This itself was a question that Rav Hoshaya had. Some say that Rav Hoshaya asked, and some say that it was actually Rav Hoshaya that raised the dilemma before Rav Asi. So some say he just asked it in general. Some say he asked it specifically to Rav Asi. Rav Asi, Rabbi Asi, is not the same as Rav Ashet that we had before. Okay, so he asked this question and he didn't know. Mincha leshum zevach, mali amar Rabbi Shimon. If someone has a korban mincha and the kohen does kemitza for the sake of a zevach, for the sake of a korban olah or asham, what would Rabbi Shimon say about this? Tamad Rabbi Shimon mishum machshava deminkera la pasla v'hamachshava deminkera hu. Should we say, as Rabbah said, that the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon is that anytime you have intention that is clearly false, it's okay. We can ignore the intention because the action is more obvious. And in this case, this is a flower. We have some kind of flower, and you're saying this is for the sake of a korban olah, for a korban asham. It's clearly not any of those things, and therefore we can ignore his intention, and it's a valid korban, fulfills the obligation of the owner. Would Rabbi Shimon say that, like Rabbah? Or the Amar Ta'amad Rabbi Shimon mishum dichtiv vezot Torah mincha vezebach lo ketib. Or maybe Rabbi Shimon's thinking is that the pasuk says this is the Torah, this is the law for mincha. This was Rava's answer, and so any type of one mincha to another mincha interchange, that's okay. But to an animal, it doesn't say zebach in the Torah. It doesn't say Zot Torah Mincha ve'hazebach. It's a different category altogether, and therefore this intention disqualifies it for the owner. So he wasn't sure. Amaleh kelum iganu lesof da'ato shel Rabbi Shimon, and Rav Asi said, well, we have not gotten to the bottom of the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon. And so they left this as a question, even though that was in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Hoshaya is in Eretz Yisrael. And so he wasn't sure about this. In Bavel, they knew about it. There was a machloket. Is it this way or that way? But it wasn't clear to them. Now, Rav Aseh, how come he didn't answer the question according to one of the opinions that we have? Well, he didn't answer as Rabbah said because of the challenge of Abaye. The challenge of Abaye was over here, where in the Baraita itself, the second Baraita, it says that there's a hekesh, that korban mincha is kodesh kadashim hi kahatat v'cha'asham. And therefore, since you're learning it from this pasuk that says kahatat v'ka'asham, there should be no distinction whether he had in mind a different type of korban or a different person who brought it. So if you're learning it from a hekesh, then it should be the same for all cases. We don't see a source to distinguish between one case and the other when he does it for a different type of kodesh or a different type or a different person. And that's why he didn't agree with Rabbah. And Rav Asi also did not give the answer of Rava because of the challenge we had from Zot Torah HaChatat. And you see from there, not everybody agrees that when it says Zot Torah, that necessarily means that everything in that pasuk, in that category, are interchangeable, that was Rava's opinion. It says Zot Torah mincha, so all Menaḥot, you can have intention for one and it still is okay for another type. But when it came to Chatat, the Chachamim did not agree that you can interchange every type of Chatat for another. So he disagreed with that methodology. And he didn't answer Rav Asher's answer that it's okay, it's lenient when he says for the sake of a pot, because of the question of Rav Acha, when he says he has a dry meal, and he says for the sake of belula, so we had a challenge from Rav Acha, and he didn't like the answer that we say, oh, belulah just means mixing in general, not a type of korban. No, if he says l'shem belulah, it does sound like he's saying a type of korban. And since Rav Asi did not accept any of the three answers, he said to Rav Hoshaya, I'm not sure what the answer is. We still have not yet gotten to the depth of Rabbi Shimon's reasoning. We return to the Mishnah that taught Chutz minchat chote uminchat kenaot regarding any other korban mincha offering. If the kohen does kemitzah shelo lishma, then it's still valid. It just does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. However, that's not true for these two. If you have a minchat chote, that's someone who made a sin and he has to bring an olev yored and he's poor and he brings a flour offering as a korban, as a chatat, or a sotah that brings a korban mincha called minchat kenaot for jealousy. In these two cases, if the kohen did kemitzah for the sake of some other type, then it's completely invalid. Bishlama minchat choteh hatat kariyah chamana lo yasim aleha shemen velo yiten aleha debona ki hatat hi vegomer ela minchat kenaot minalan. So we understand we have a source regarding the mincha of the sinner because it's called a hatat. Where do you see that? In the pasuk that says, do not put on it shemen and do not put on it lebona because it is a hatat. This is talking about the korban olev yored. It's called a hatat. And therefore, just like an animal hatat, if the kohen does shechita or any of the four major actions and having in mind something else, then it's pasul completely. So too, this is also called a chatat, so it makes sense to apply the same law. But minchat kenaot, that's not called a chatat ever, so why should it be the law also for that? Tana kamed Rav Nachman, minchat kenaot motara nedaba. We have a source that's based on a baraita that a memorizer recited in front of Rav Nachman. This baraita says that minchat kenaot, the leftover, let's say you designated a certain amount of money, $50, to buy barley for minchat kenaot. It's made from barley. It's a very low level thing because we want to denigrate it. And so $50. And then turns out it only costs $40. The price, it was cheap price. Now you have an extra $10 that you don't need to use. What do you do with that extra $10? Well, you give it as a nedava. Rambam says that you use it to buy other voluntary mincha offerings. Rashi says voluntary korban olah offerings. So that's what we do with it. Now, when he said that, Rav Nachman responded, Amar le Shapir Kamar, oh, very nice baraita that you taught me, thank you. Mazkeret avon ketiba, ubachatat ketiv, ve'ota natan lachem laset et avon ha'eda. Ma chatat motara nedaba af minchat, kenaot motara nedaba. Now that you taught me this law, I can figure out the source for it because regarding the korban mincha for a sotah, it says mazkeret avon. It brings up a remembrance of iniquity, and it says also regarding chatat that it is. This is in the context of Nadav and Avihu when they die. It says this korban hatat Hashem gave you to bear the burden, to bear the sin of the congregation. Moshe tells this to Aharon. So you see, it says the word avon regarding sotah, and it says the word avon also regarding a korban hatat. So we can learn one from the other. Gezer hashava. Just like when you have a korban hatat and you have extra money, I designated $500 to buy an animal for it, and I spent only $450. So then the leftover goes to voluntary offerings. It'll go to a korban olah. That when the mizbeach is idle, the kohanim don't want it to just be idle. They will use that money to buy a korban and burn it on the mizbeach. And since it says avon there and avon here, so too minchat kenaot of a sotah, if you have leftover money after buying the barley, then you give it as a voluntary offering. And now that we know a gezer hashava, we can learn other things that by comparison between the two. Just like a korban hatat, if he did it l'shem asham or shem olah, anything, then it's totally invalid. So too, the mincha offering of a sotah will be totally invalid if it's offered for the sake of if the kemitzah is for the sake of something else, or kemitzah or any of the major 4 actions. Okay, so it looks like we have a good source, but here's a problem. If you're going to use the word avon as a gezerah shavah, the word avon also appears regarding an asham. It's right here in this pasuk. Ve'im nefesh ki techeta v'aseta achad mekom mitzvot Adonai asher lo te'asena ve'lo yada ve'Hashem v'nasa avono. And it goes on and explains the laws of a korban asham. Here it says the word avon, or says technically avono, but why not make a gezerah shavah here also and say, if you make a asham shelo lishmo, then also it will be pasul. But that's not the law of an asham. Oh, so we can answer this. Danin avon me avon, ven danin avono me avon. We're going to use the exact phrase, the exact word. Avon is said in chatat, and the word avon precisely for mincha. So we make that gezerah shavah. But for asham, it says avono. It's a different word, so we're not going to make a gezerah shavah there. But we reject this because my nafka mineh. What's the difference between avon, avono? I'll show you a case where we make a gezerah shavah between 2 completely different words, but just have similar meanings. V'atana deber b'Ishmael, v'shaba kohen u'ba kohen. Zohi shiba, zohi bi'ah. When it comes to sarat on a house, the kohen has to come, check out the house, he put it in quarantine, come back 7 days later, see if it grew. How many times does he do this process? The Gemara learns from a gezerah shavah, the Baraita from the school of Ishmael learns from a gezerah shavah that just like when it says shava kohen, it means you give it another 7 days and see what happens. So too when it says uba kohen, a few pesukim later, you should do the same thing, because we're making gezerah shavah from beshav and veba. And look, you're making gezerah shavah with 2 completely different words, so avon, avono is close enough. You should be able to make a gezerah shavah. Ve'od, ligmad avono avono me'avon d'shmiyat hakol. Tichtib im lo yagid v'nasa avono. And furthermore, in Vayikra 5:1, was talking about a korban chatat. It's a type of olev yored. And it says the word avono. It's talking about if someone makes a vow that he doesn't have any information of testimony. And turns out he's lying. And then he has to bring this korban chatat, and it's called avono. So if you want the exact word avono, we have it in chatat and also in asham. So there you go. You could certainly make a gezerah shavah. Rather, it's evident that we make a gezerah shavah above between mincha and chatat, but only for the law of the leftover money. That's where we make the gezerah shavah. But we cannot use that gezerah shavah for this law of when it's not shelo lishmo, because it obviously doesn't work for asham. Now, v'chitema en gezerah shavah lemechesa. Now, even regarding that law, if you say, no, you can't do a half gezerah shavah. Once you have a gezerah shavah, and you open up the channel between 2 different laws through a shared word or phrase, then you should be able to learn all the laws from one to the other. And we don't do only halfway. But in this case, in fact, it's okay to do that because the Torah revealed itself regard when it comes to the law of chatat, that this law of shelo lishmo's pasul is specific to chatat. When the pasuk says v'shachat otah lechatat, otah lishma keshera, shelo lishma pesula, aval kol kodashim ben lishman ben shelo lishman kesherim. When the pasuk says you should slaughter it as a chatat, and the word it, otah, is extra to teach. If you slaughter it for its own sake, for a chatat, then it's valid. But otherwise, for the sake of something else, it's invalid. That's true for this law of chatat, but regarding other kodashim, whether you slaughtered it for its sake or for another sake, it's kasher. So because this pasuk specifically limits this law of pesul, when it's shelo lishma, it limits it specifically to chatat. Therefore, we're going to remove this from the gezerah shavah. So that gezerah shavah still stands, but only to teach the law of motar nedaba. Now we're all the way back to the drawing board. So back to the Mishnah that said these 2 korban minchas, choten kenaot. If you do shelo lishma pasul, we don't have a source. Hatat ta'amamai mishum dichti bahi. Hachiname haketi bahi. Okay, we'll try another gezer hashava. Regarding korban hatat, this is for a nasi. It says, "V'samach yado al rosh hasa'ir v'shachat oto b'mkom asher yishchat et ha'olah lifnei Adonai hatat hu." The Gemara says the word he, and our chumashim we have hu. Okay, so let's just say hu, and so it says the word hu regarding a korban hatat. And it also says the word hu regarding the korban mincha, as it says here, "V'imlot asig yado lishtei torim or lishnei bnei yonah ve'bi et korbano asher chata asirit ha'efa solet lechatat lo yasim aleh bona ve'lo yiten aleh bona ki chatat hu." He, actually this one it's written he vav aleph, but we pronounce it he. So there you go, and it says the word he or who, and in this one as well. So there you go. Just like it says he, so too it says here he. And that's also true in Menaḥot Kenaot. Menaḥot Kenaot is this pasuk here. Ve'avi ha'ish et ishto lakohen ve'abi et korbana alea sirit ha'efa kema sorim lo yisrael Hashem lo yiten aleh bona ki Menaḥot Kenaot hu Menaḥot zikaron maskeret avon. So now we have a three-way gezer hashava. It says the word hu when it comes to korban hatat, and it says the word he or who also regarding a minchat choteh and minchat kenaot. So it's just like if it's shelo lishma for chatat is pasul, so too for these two types of korban mincha, shelo lishman will be pasul. Question again from Hasham. Hasham nameh haketi behu. Hasham, it also says the word who, as it says right here. V'hiktira otam hakohen mizbecha ishe ladonai Hasham hu. So then you're going to make a gezer hashava for Hasham hu, and then you'll also learn shelo lishma is pasul, but that's not true for Hasham. No, hahu. That who is la'achar haktarat emurim udichtib. The context is first you do hakviktir otam hakohen. You're burning all the sacrificial parts, and then it says the word who. So you see that that word who is regarding the sacrificial parts. The sacrificial portions, the emurim, are not one of the four essential activities. In the other Pesukim above, it says the word he or who regarding one of the essential activities. That's where, if you do a shelo lishma, it will make it pasul. But here, the word who is not talking about one of the four essential activities, and therefore, even if you didn't do it at all, if you didn't burn the emurim at all, it will still be a valid korban, as it says in a baraita, kedetanya. Aval Hashem lo ne'emar bo hu ela lachar haktarat emurim hu atzmo shelo kturu amurav kasher. Regarding Hashem, it doesn't say the word who only after it mentions burning of the emurim, and the emurim themselves, even if you didn't burn them at all, something happened to them, it's still a valid offering. And therefore, we're not going to learn from that who, which is way later in the process, we're not going to learn anything about the four activities of Hashem. If they were shelo lishma, it's still valid. So we solved that problem. Ve'lahu lamali. So now we ask indeed, then why does it say who regarding the haktarat emurin when it comes to an Hashem? Lichterav huna amarav. Lichterav huna amarav. Hashem shenitak l'ra'aya ushchato setam kasher l'shum ola. Is to teach us the law that Rav said, that if you have an Hashem, korban Hashem, and let's say the owner, he died, or he had another animal that he already used. So now you have an animal designated as a korban Hashem, but it's not usable as a korban Hashem. So what are we supposed to do in that case? We designate it to go graze. Designate means we give it over to a shepherd and said, here, go take this to graze. And we wait till it gets a blemish. Once it gets a blemish, we can sell it, redeem it for money, and with that money, buy a korban olah. And Rav taught a chidush. Once the Hashem is given over to the shepherd, and let's say at that point, someone did shechita. You're supposed to let it graze and then sell it. Instead, he did shechita setam, with no specific korban in mind. you know what? It's automatically that animal itself can turn into a korban olah. And we derive this from this word hu. Nitak in, lo nitak la. Amar kerahu b'havayato yeheh. We learn that only this leniency that you can take, if you did shechita on this animal, it's automatically an olah. That's only if it was consigned to grazing, that you gave it over to the shepherd and said, here, go graze this. But if not, you had this asham. The owner died. We didn't yet give it over to the shepherd. And then someone did shechita. Will that be valid as an korban olah? The answer is no, because it says hu, it remains in its state. It remains as is. And then you did shechita on an asham that has no owner. In that case, it's just an invalid asham. Only once you give it over to the shepherd, then it's not hu. It's not in its original state. Now you already started the transfer process over to korban olah. So if you do shechita at that time, then it's a valid korban olah. Amar Rav, minchat haomer shekemasa shelo lishma pesula ho'ilu bat lehatir velo hitira. Rav is going to add yet another type of korban mincha that if you do it shelo lishma, it's no good at all, it's invalid, and that's minchat haomer that we bring on the second day of Pesach. When we bring the korban Omer, that's barley, on the second day of Pesach, that permits all of the grain that had grown since and been harvested can now be used in the coming year. Before you bring the korban Omer, all the new grain, the hadash, cannot be used. So minchat Omer, if the kohen did kemitzah, but he had in mind, this is for the sake of some other type of korban mincha, not only does it not fulfill its obligation, it's also invalid. Why? Because its purpose is coming to permit. It comes to permit all the rest of the grain that now you can use. So what we have here is a kind of a paradox. In order for this grain, this barley offering to be valid, the minchat haomer, it's from chadash. You go and cut wheat, you cut barley rather, the night before, and then you bring it. You're not allowed to use that barley until you bring the omer. So if it's valid, good. This bringing of the first barley permits one to use all this barley and all the barley in the future. So therefore it's good, it's valid. But if you bring this barley for the sake of some other type of korban, now you have not brought the korban ha'omer. Therefore, this barley is actually prohibited, and therefore it's going to be invalid. So this is yet another type besides the hatat and minchat kenaot. This is another type that, if you don't have the proper intention, then is completely invalid. And Rav adds also an animal sacrifice. Besides, we know korban hatat and korban pesach, if you have in mind a different type of korban that's invalid, but he says also, v'chenata omer be'asham nazir, ve'asham mesora, sheshechatan shelo lishman pesulino ilu ba'al le'achshir ve'lo hichshiru. That asham that's brought by a nazir, if he became tameh and he has to restart his nizirut, he has to bring an asham, and also a mesora in order to become pure at the end of his purification time. He has to bring an asham. Now, if someone, whoever's doing shechita on it, does it for the sake of something else, not only does it not fulfill the obligation of the person bringing it, but it's also invalid. Why? Because it's coming to make the person fit, so that now they can start their nizirut again, or so that now the mesorah can come back to the mikdash and he can partake of korbanot. He can be tahor again. You see, this is also a kind of a catch-22. The mesorah cannot enter into the mikdash and partake of sacrifices until he brings this asham. So if he brings the asham and it's a valid asham, good. Now he comes in and they do the procedure in the mikdash. But if the asham is for sake of something else, then not only does it not fulfill the obligation of the owner because it doesn't fulfill, that's the whole purpose of it, is to fulfill the obligation of the owner. There is no other purpose. And so therefore, it becomes invalid. That's Rav's two laws. Now we're going to wonder, how come the Mishnah here in Menaḥot and the Mishnah back in Zevachim don't mention these, because it mentions the other things, that are exceptional. So we ask, Tenan, Kol Menaḥot shikmesu shelo lishman kesherot, ela shelo alu labe'alim l'shum chova. Chutz minchat choter minchat kenaot. V'im ita litninami chutz minchat ha'omer. And Mishnah taught that all types of korban mincha, if the kohen does kmitza, not for its sake, it's valid, but it does not fulfill the obligation of the owner, except for minchat chotem, minchat kenaot. Now, according to Rav, if should be another one, if minchat ha'omer also is invalid, if it's not l'shem, then it should add also chutz minchat ha'omer. How come it didn't mention it? We give three reasons. Ki katane ba'a yachid, ba'a sibur la katane. And Mishnah is only talking about individual korbanot, but korban ha'omer is a communal one. Kitane ba'a biglal atzma, ba'a biglal zebach la katane. We're also only enumerating korban menachas that come by themselves on their own, whereas the korban ha'omer comes along with two sheep, and so that comes. It's together with other things. We're not counting things that are coming together with other sacrifices. Ki katane hanach she'en kabod lehen zeman, hanach kabod la zeman la katane. We're also only mentioning in the Mishnah things that don't have a fixed time. It's whenever a person sins or there happens to be a sotah. But the korban omer has a fixed time. So therefore, for these three reasons, the Mishnah did not enumerate this one. Okay, how about the asham? Amar mor v'chen atamer be'asham nazir v'asham mesorah shechatan l'shman pesulin ho'ilu ba lachshir v'lo hikshiru. Rav also taught that regarding Hasham Nazir and Hasham Mesorah, if someone did shechita, having in mind something else, then not only does not fulfill the obligation, it's the whole sacrifice is invalid because its purpose is to come to make a person fit. And it did not make the person fit, so it's completely invalid. Tenan, kol hazevachim shechatan shelo lishman kesherin. אלא שלא עלו לבעלים לשום חובה חוץ מפסח וחטאת ואם איתה ליתנינה מחוץ מהשם נזיר והשם מסורה דבאו להכשיר ולא הכשירו. The Mishnah back in the beginning of Masechet Zevachim said all korbanot, if one did shechita for the sake of another animal, then of another type of korban, it's kosher, it's a valid korban, but it does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. And the two exceptions are Pesach and Chatat. But if these two types of Hasham are also included, are also exceptional, then the Mishnah should have taught, except for Hasham Nazir and Hasham Mesorah, because they come to make someone fit, and they didn't make the person fit because you had in mind something else, since it didn't apply to the owner to make them fit, therefore, it's totally invalid. Why not mention this? Because there are other types of Hashamot. Hashem Gezerot, Hashem Me'ilot. Those don't come to make a person fit. They come to atone. Person sinned. They stole and they owe money and they lied. They swore falsely about it, or they committed Me'ilah. They need kapara. So the Mishnah doesn't want to say just some ashams and some ashams. It wants to give categories. So if you say chatat, it applies to all korban chatat offerings. Good. But asham, since it only applies to some and not others, the Mishnah did not want to enumerate and therefore didn't mention them at all. Okay, now we ask about that's fundamental distinction. What's the difference between Hasham Nazir and Hasham Mesorah, where if you did Shelo Lishma, it's pasul, because they come to make a person fit, and it didn't make a person fit. Okay, these other Hasham Gezot, Hasham Me'ilot, they come for kapara, and they didn't achieve atonement. That's the only reason you're bringing them is for atonement, and so since they didn't achieve atonement, why not say the same thing, same logic, and since it didn't fulfill what the purpose, then maybe that also should be completely invalid. Biyamia says we have a precedent in the Torah where there are pisukim that make a distinction between sacrifices that bring atonement and sacrifices that cause someone to be fit. Whereas some, not all, but some sacrifices that come for atonement, you can bring it even after the owner died. That shows, if you can bring it even after the owner died, that means that it has its own identity. Even though the person died, you can still bring it. Therefore, it would make sense that even if you had the wrong thing in mind, for mechaperim, you had an intention for something else, but still it has its own identity, its own validity. So you can let it go, and the korban will still be valid. Whereas machshirin, we never find an example of an animal that was brought to make someone fit, that you'd still offer it after the person died. Which means, when it comes to machshirin, the total identity of that sacrifice is only and only for the doing the machshir. That therefore it comes together. Because of that, once the person dies, you can't bring it at all. And so too, if you have the wrong thing in mind and it's not going to be machshir for that person, well then it's completely invalid. Okay, so we do have a precedent for that. What is it? It's a Mishnah Masechet Kinim, Ditnan. Ha'isha she'eviya chatat umeta, yabi yorshin olata. Olata umeta, lo yabi yorshin hatata. This one works a little bit backwards, where you have a woman who gave birth. She has to bring a chatat and an olah. You might think the chatat is giving kapara, but it's not so. The chatat, she didn't do anything wrong. She just gave birth. Mitzvah, very nice. So the chatat is actually here a machshir, and the olah is serving as a general atonement for her. So if a woman brought her chatat and then she died, you can still bring the korban olah. In this case, the olah is a mechaper. So you see, you can still bring a mechaper even after the person dies. And that means it has its own independent identity besides the owner, and therefore if you did something wrong and the owner doesn't count for the owner, you could still bring it as its own korban, it has its own identity. Whereas she brings her olah and then she dies, you cannot bring the chatat. The chatat is here as a machshir, makes her fit to be able to partake of sacrifices in the future. It's the completion of her tahara process. Since that's a machshir, she cannot bring it after. So you see, this is a good example of the distinction between machshir and mechaper, and that's why when it comes to these different types of ashams, if it's asham that's mechaper, you can still bring it even though you had the wrong intention. But if it's an asham that's machshir, then you cannot bring it at all. It becomes invalid if you had any wrong intention. מתקיף לה רבי יהודה ברד רבי שמעון בן פזי. מכשירין נעמה מילת בהודעתו לאחר מיתה. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, challenges this distinction that Rabbi Yirmiyah made. And so he asks, is there not an example of a korban that is machshir? Machshir means it makes someone fit to be able to do something that they were not able to do before. Don't we have an example where someone actually can bring a korban that is meant to machshir even after the person died? We do have such an example. It's right here in a Mishnah Masechet Me'ila. V'hatenan. Hamafrish ma'ot lenziruto. Someone was a nazir and now he completes his term of nazirut. He has to bring 3 korbanot, a korban chatat, olah, and shelamim. He designated money for this. $1,000. He said, here, $1,000, I'm going to use this to buy my 3 korbanot. Now that money, lo nehenin velo mo'alin, mipnei sheruyin lavo kulan shelamim. Lechatechila, one should not get personal benefit from it because it's designated money for consecration. However, if somebody b'di'avad did get personal benefit from it, he does not commit me'ilah, because any of the money is fit to use for shelamim. Now, shelamim, there's no me'ilah on shelamim but while it's still alive. It's a kadashim kalim. Only kodshe kodashim, once you designate the animal, then there already is me'ilah. So therefore, although for the olah and the hatat, those are kodshe kodashim, and one, if that was an animal that was alive, one would commit me'ilah, but because he didn't designate the money, which one is for this animal and which is for that animal, so any of the money could be for shalamim, therefore he does not commit me'ilah b'di'avad, although he should not get benefit from it. Met. Now here's the case we want. If the Nazir died and now he has this money, it's sitting in his drawer, it's labeled, what are we going to do? If he didn't designate the money, how much is for this money is for this korban, that for korban, he just said $1,000, here's the coins in an envelope, it says this is for all of my Nazir sacrifices. Since it's not designated, we take all of them and we allocate it to Nedava, to Korban Olah. Good. Meforashin. But what if it is designated? He says here, this 300, this is going to be for chata. That 300 is going to be for an olah, and that is going to be for shilamim. So he designated which coins are which. Then, what do we do? Menaḥot yolich li'am hamelach. Korban hatat, if it was alive and the nazir died, you'd have to leave it to die. And you can't use it. You can't sacrifice it on his behalf. And therefore, the money also cannot be used not for any other korban. You have to throw it into the Dead Sea. Lo nehenin velo mo'alin. You should not get benefit from it. Although, b'di'avad, also there would be no me'ilah, since even if it was a live animal, since it's designated to die, there wouldn't be me'ilah. So the money also, there's no me'ilah. Deme olah, yavi bahen olah u'mo'alin ba. The money that's designated for korban olah, you have to buy an olah with it. And you do commit me'ilah with that, because it can be a perfectly fine animal that you buy. The animal that you buy, you'd commit me'ilah. And so to the money, you do commit me'ilah. Deme shelamim, yavi bahen shelamim. V'nechalin liyom echad ve'entonim lechem. And the money that's for shelamim, bring a shelamim. You can always bring a voluntary shelamim. And it's eaten only for one day, although you do not bring bread with it. It's for one day, just like a shilamim brought it for a nazir. Usually a shilamim you can eat for 2 days, but this one has a special status, only one day, even, if the nazir had brought it. So now even though the nazir died, still it retains that law. Although you do not bring the loaves. Normally a nazir who brings shilamim has to bring loaves with it, but the nazir, when he's alive, he waves it. But now the nazir is dead, so nobody's going to wave it, so therefore you don't have to bring the loaves at all. That's the end of the Mishnah. Here's the question. Va'olah ushlamim, the nazir the machshirim ninhu v'katu lachar mita. The olah and shilamim of a nazir, they make him fit. They finish off his tahara process. Once he brings these korbanot, then he's finished. He can drink wine. He can be a regular person again. And so these are machshirim, and yet you can offer them even after the nazir died. So you see, isn't that a counter example to Rabbi Yirmiya's principle? Amar Papa Hachi Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Lo masinu hechsher kabua deba la'achar mita unzir hechsher she'eno kavuahu. What Rabbi Yirmiyah meant is we never find a fixed hechsher that is brought after mita. But this nazir is not something fixed. What does it mean fixed? That this korban is the only thing that is needed to make the hechsher, right? Nothing else could substitute for it. When this sacrifice is the only thing that can effectuate the change, then there's never a thing like that is brought after death. However, for a nazir, it's not the only thing. There's actually options for him. Damar mor, geleach al achat mishaloshtan yasa. There's a statement regarding a nazir. The master taught that if the nazir shaved his head, even after bringing only one of these 3 sacrifices, any one, it's okay, he fulfilled his obligation. So you see, you don't need all 3 as hechsher. Even it's not one particular one that you need. If you bring one or the other, any of the 3, then that's considered hechsher. So that's why it's called hechsher she'eno kavua. And that would mean that really only one is hechsher. The other 2, you're supposed to bring, but it's not necessary for hechsher. Therefore, it's not called hechsher kavua. So when the Rebbe made his distinction, there's no such thing as a hechsher kavua, something that is only and can only be brought and only needs to be, the only thing that has to be brought to make a hechsher, that we never find that someone brings after death. Me'etibeh, another challenge against Rav. Hasham mesorah shenishchat shelo lishmo, or shelo nitan midamo al gabe behonot, hareze ole legabe mizbech v'ta'un nesachim, v'serich hasham acher lachshiro, tiyub ta'aderav. We have a braita that explicitly contradicts the law of Rav. Here it says, Hasham mesorah, that someone did shechita not for its sake, or the blood was not placed on his right thumb and his big toe, and hareze ole legabe mizbech. You can still offer it. It's still valid as a sacrifice. And you have to bring the nesachim, you have to bring the wine libation with it. Just that, you have to, the mesorah will have to bring another one. It doesn't fulfill the obligation for him in order to be machshir. But it is valid. This is a contradiction of Rav, because Rav said that Hasham mesorah is one of his 2 examples, where if you bring it shelo lishmo, then it's invalid. But this baraita says it is valid. So therefore, this is a refutation of the law of Rav. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.